The topic of this next talk is this the end of car ownership? Well, let me tell you something about our next guest. Our next guest, Scott Painter, has quite a unique history. He's Californian, as myself. He joined the Army as soon as he graduated. He was an airborne Spanish interrogator. He actually invaded Panama. Then he was nominated by President Bush 41 to West Point, where he became class president. Then he joined Cal Berkeley on the rugby scholarship. He started his first company as a student, which was a database for used cars. Since then, he has founded over 47 companies and raised over $2 billion. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Scott Painter.
So, first of all, that's a great introduction. 47 companies, so I'm pretty excited to be at a conference where everybody's in the startup mode and raising money. That's probably been what I've done the most of, but I've really been an automotive entrepreneur. So it seems that everybody wants to ask some of these big questions about the future of car ownership. I'm going to talk to you today about it. But wherever I seem to go, it's a little bit more than just the future of car ownership. People want to know about the future of the automotive industry. Is it going to survive? What's the impact of autonomous driving cars, ride sharing? I mean, there's even questions about sort of the evolution of mobility and whether or not people are even going to want to own a car at all. And so this topic today, the future of car ownership, has a lot to do with what I do today. So I'm currently the founder of a company called Fair. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the bigger issue, and I'm also going to introduce you to my company. But Fair is an app that represents a totally new way to get a car. And this big idea of great companies solve real problems really sort of started with where I've been focused for the last 25 years. Of those companies, I've had two of them go public. I was an Idealab CEO. But the two companies that I had go public, CarsDirect.com, which went public under the name Internet Brands, and TrueCar, have really been focused on getting a car. This first part of the problem, shopping for a car. There's really three phases of vehicle ownership, and I'll talk about all three of them today. But when I think about cars, for me, I could give you an intellectual argument about why car ownership is not going to go away, and the punchline is that it isn't, or I could give you a little bit more of an emotional one. So let me just start with a little bit of the argument about why car ownership isn't going to go away. There are currently 1.4 billion cars on planet Earth driving around. 90% of those cars are financed. The average automobile costs 50% of what someone makes, no matter where you are around the world. So you've got $5 trillion of consumer debt financing 1.4 billion cars, currently non-autonomous, non-self-driving cars. If 100% of the cars that we produced next year were autonomous cars, it would take 17 years to get rid of all the non-autonomous cars. We only currently today retire about 10 to 12 million cars a year, and we produce globally 100 million cars. So we are adding more cars than we are taking out of the fleet. The assumption around the end of car ownership takes a very idealistic approach to this notion that consumers are going to stop the repayment of nearly $5 trillion of consumer debt and strand 1.4 billion cars. It's a pretty unlikely outcome. That's the beginning of the intellectual argument, not to mention the 10 million people globally who sell cars. Some of the most resilient entrepreneurs on the planet, dealers, and everybody that works at the dealership. The emotional argument, I think, is a little bit different. So, how many of you remember the first car you ever got? I remember the first car I got. was a pretty exciting moment in my life. But a car represents lots of things. It represents freedom. It represents sort of a milestone in your life. It represents a big accomplishment. And that first car for me was almost an avatar of who I was. It was sort of my way of saying that's who I want to be or where I want to go. And it's a big deal. And I've got 4 kids. The big guy over on the right, he's 15. What do you think 15-year-olds are thinking about? Cars. Every day we get home, he wants to drive up and down the driveway, but he's already picked out his car. He spends a lot of time on fair looking at all the cars that we've got. But it turns out the little one in the middle, Indy, she's 5. She's already picked out one of my cars. All of my kids love cars. The idea that they're not going to similarly love the freedom that getting a car represents is a little bit silly. The idea of owning a car, the ability to say, that's my car, is a really big deal. The ability to have the optionality, the freedom to go where you want, when you want. If you're a parent, the idea that you want to be in control of the vehicle, that you want to have the ability to lock the doors, go where you want, when you want, but also put your own child safety seats in the car, all of that security, optionality, and status come with ownership. But the myth really starts with the fact that over the last 100 years, the automotive century, we've been forcing consumers to go out and borrow the full price of the car to finance a depreciating asset that they have no idea what it's worth or what it's going to be worth, is the real problem. The trick is, how do you get all of those benefits, the emotional benefits, without having to borrow all that money? Turns out I've spent a lot of my career trying to figure out that part, getting a car, where you got to go into a car dealership and leveling the playing field. TrueCar was really about truth and information and making sure that you as a consumer were armed to go into the dealership. Cars Direct was about not having to go to the dealer in the first place. And I've had a big fight with car dealers in my career. It's been a pretty high friction career. This idea, though, that, and I go back to my 2 girls, one of the things you learn when you start studying shopping behavior is that 3 out of 4 women state that they feel they need to have a man with them when they go to a car dealership. As a father of girls, I think this is the problem. This idea that women feel so terrified that they feel the need to be protected. And it's not just women. Millennials have now gotten to the point, the modern buyer has said, I just don't even want to go into a car dealership. So the auto industry has a real problem. But owning a car is no easier. A car requires tax, title, registration. You've got to fill out all these forms. You've got to pay all these fees. It's sort of part of growing up. I remember when I got that first car, having to do all this stuff sort of meant to me like, wow, I'm becoming a grown-up. I've got all this complex stuff I've got to manage. But then it gets worse. So when you own a car, you've got to maintain it. You've got to repair it. You've got to fuel it. And it turns out everywhere on planet Earth, you have to insure it if you're going to drive it on the road. So if you think about what it costs to own a car, you've got this $5 trillion worth of cars actually being sold a year. You've got the vehicle park, which is 1.4 billion cars, is worth $5 trillion in consumer debt, but we've actually got $5 trillion worth of new and used cars being sold every year on the planet. But when you add insurance, maintenance, repair, fuel, and accessories, all the things that go along with owning a car, that complexity, it's almost $10 trillion. And the idea that the car is going to be autonomous is a certainty. The car in your driveway will do more of the driving for you. It will protect you from making accidents. It will protect the passengers. It'll protect the people around the car. You're going to have a real disruption in insurance, for sure, so cars will become safer and safer. But even if the car in your driveway drives itself, or if you think about it this way, it doesn't matter whether you're driving the car, the Uber driver is driving the car, or the car is driving the car. Somebody owns that car, and that car has to be insured. It's not as though autonomy is going to get a hall pass on insurance. Not likely. So owning a car, which is where I haven't spent a lot of my time, is sort of this second phase. But then we've got the third phase, which is really fascinating to me. Buying a car usually happens when something really good is going on in your life. So if you think about the last time you got a car, it's usually a promotion. You're getting married, you're having kids, you're moving. I mean, these are all positive milestones in your life. So cars are supposed to be this joyful moment that you mark this progress in your life with. It also turns out moving is sort of one of those things. And one of the things that we listen to when we're talking about what millennials sort of find frustrating about car ownership, one of the big issues is commitment. And in order to move, you got to sell your car. And given that a car represents almost 20% of the average person's net worth, the idea that you're going to strand your car and move to another town is untenable. So what do? We list it in the classifieds, and we become a used car salesman, only to know we're going to get a huge, painful financial reality when we lose about half the value of that car and sell it ourselves. So buying, owning, and selling a car are the three phases, all very, very tough sort of things to deal with as a consumer. So let me talk a little bit about FAIR and what we did to address that and to solve it. It starts with the commitment. So what we did is looked at flexible ownership, which is a hot topic right now, and said, how can we provide flexible ownership that starts with this premise, no commitment? Can we give the consumer flexible ownership and give them the option to return the car at any time? Now, this really begins with comparing it to rental. In a rental conversation, you're selecting from a car that's inside of a rental fleet. We did not want to give you that option. We wanted to give you the ability to get any car you want. There's currently, and I'm just going to use a US statistic, but anything you look at in terms of a US statistic, you can generally multiply by 5 to get to a global answer. But in the US, there are currently 3.5 million used cars for sale, sitting on the ground, waiting to be sold. 100% of those cars are discoverable electronically. The classifieds have digitized, and if you go to cars.com, AutoTrader, or TrueCar, you can find them all. So the cars that you see in FAIR are all of those cars. The second thing, and everybody in the auto industry right now is trying to get to, how do we make a digital transaction? It turns out the only way to make the transaction completely digital is to navigate tax, title, and registration all electronically. There is no way to get the departments of motor vehicles in each jurisdiction around the world to all agree to the same standard at the same time. The only way to actually solve for this and to make a truly digital transaction is to become a principal in the transaction. So what we've done in our solution is we actually buy the car. And if you think about what's unique about that, we almost have perfect information today. Consumers have been financing cars without any visibility as to what that car's future value is going to be worth. But we have perfect data on retail transactions and wholesale transactions. We today can use pattern recognition and predictive analytics to actually know what a car is going to be worth. And I'll talk a little bit about sort of the why now in all of this in terms of the structural. But in terms of fast and digital, what we've created is the ability for you to download the app, scan your driver's license, you're shopping for cars. All of the cars are presented with a monthly payment, not with a price, because you're not buying the car. You're entering into a contract with us to get access to the car for all of the emotional things that I was talking about earlier. That's my car, I get to go where I want, and I get to feel secure in that car. All of this has to be delivered, and this is sort of the eternal promise of technology at a savings. So I'll just give you some very back of envelope, rough justice savings. This is about half the cost of a rental for the consumer. It's 40% less than a traditional 3-year car loan. And you ready for this? More importantly, it's about 1/5 the cost of ride sharing on a per mile basis. Ride sharing is about $2 a mile. This is about 30 cents a mile. So you get the car you want, all the benefits of ownership, and a dramatic price savings. One of the things that we felt was important, because we're focused only on used cars, I'll talk about why in a second, because it has to do with sort of the argument for why now and what the industry is facing. But our payment includes a warranty, maintenance, standard roadside assistance. That way you don't have to worry about those things. And if you want, we even sell insurance, collision and liability, and excess wear and tear, or you can put the car on your existing insurance policy at no additional cost. So this is truly an all-in single cost of ownership. What's interesting about what we've decided to do is we're not lending you money. We are not approving you for a $25,000 car. We're trying to determine how much you can afford. So everything that you see in the shopping app once you've scanned your driver's license presents you with cars based on monthly payments that you can afford, and this is an all-in monthly payment. If for whatever reason you change your job or you don't want the car, you just notify us in the app and then you return the car. But we don't ruin your credit. We don't come after you for the amount of the loan. And this is because about 40% of consumers who get cars are currently in almost a predatory lending situation. They are subprime auto finance customers, and it turns out the people who actually need fairness the most are the people who get it the least. They overpay on the car because they don't have buying options, they overpay on the interest, and they overpay on the down payment. So this is really a flexible ownership option that has all the benefits of ownership, all the emotional benefits, all the flexibility and freedom that you get with a rental, and all the cost savings that you get in a lease. Okay, so now, super quick on sort of the overall market. I explained you've got $4.5 trillion worth of cars globally that are bought and sold. Insurance today represents another 8%. And what we're trying to build to is what is the overall addressable mobility spend. These are the things that all go along with ownership that I was referring to earlier. The purchase of the vehicle, insurance, maintenance and repairs, finance, gas and oil or refueling. Let's see if we catch up here. But the overall TAM is just about $10 trillion when you look at it. And that's just the current state of play today. So that's what FAIR is going after, the global mobility budget. We are focusing on replacing that for the average consumer. If you make $100,000 a year, you're spending about $1,100 or $1,200 a month on mobility as a general spend. About half of that is being spent on the car. The other half of that is being spent on all of that other stuff. So the argument for why now, why now is really based on the fact that you've got a number of really important cycles. The car business is incredibly cyclical. In 2010 and 11, we went down in the United States from almost a 16 million car production market to below 10 million cars. What that created was a shortage of late model used cars in 2010, 11, 12, and 13. And the car business went through a very interesting period of time where they had record profits because 80% of the premium and luxury side of the market has gone to leasing today. And so when those cars came back into a very supply-constrained market and those cars were selling for very high retail selling prices, consumers tended to lease more cars because buying a used car was too expensive, and the car companies that were selling cars made a ton of money. Record profitability. The opposite is now true. We've been in peak production for nearly 2 years. We're approaching in the US 18 million cars, globally 100 million cars being produced on the planet. That's creating a tsunami of late model used cars. And just in the US alone, you've got 6 million used cars that are going to be coming back in the next 12 to 18 months. Those cars in the last year have seen a depression in terms of retail selling price of almost 20%, the greatest drop in the 100-year history of automotive. So you've got sort of a black swan event that happened 4 or 5 years ago that is creating a very structural problem for the OEMs. They've got to figure out a way to get these cars out without taking the losses by selling them into a depression or into a slumping auction price. So what we've created is a way for consumers to get into a car, but also to put these cars back to work, to keep them on the road. And by pricing the car so that the consumer is just paying for depreciation plus fees, because we have that perfect information, we become the lender, not the consumer. The consumer is simply paying a service fee for accessing all of these things, simplifying their life and saving money. We launched about a month ago. We've got 130 or 140 customers just in Los Angeles. You can download the app. You can go to the iOS App Store, and it's an iOS app only right now, but you can see that it's live in Los Angeles. You go to FAIR and then type in auto, and It'll give you the whole experience. You'll see that once you scan your driver's license, you can immediately begin shopping for cars that you can afford. Just to demo it, you can actually skip the driver's license process and just see all the cars and see how the system works. But the big bet here, the disruption is not whether or not the car business survives. The disruption is about whether or not consumer lending for auto survives. Consumers simply won't need to go borrow huge sums of money to get access to a depreciating asset. The only thing they should actually go borrow money for is an appreciating asset like a home or a collector's car, which is not really our market. But these are all fair customers. Folks who've gotten a car over the last month, you'll see really nice high-end cars and entry-level cars. Over 60% of the cars on the program are less than $400 a month, but we've got cars that are $2,000 a month and at the high end. So this works just as well for somebody who's very wealthy looking for convenience as it does for a single mom working 2 jobs on a budget, because it turns out everybody can afford a car, just a different car. All right, thanks for having me.